Usually when you think about classical sculpture or pottery even, there's this inherent expectation of permanence.
Right, you want it to last forever.
Exactly. You take a lump of wet earth, you subject it to the brutal environment of a kiln, and what comes out is fixed. It's static.
A finished object just intended to sit unchanged on a pedestal for a millennium.
Yeah, precisely. But when you step into the world of Kusamono, that whole idea of permanence is just completely subverted.
It really is.
You are taking that static, vitrified earth and forcing it into a dialogue with a living, growing, decaying organism.
The plant itself.
Right, and that tension between the frozen clay and the living plant is exactly what Bernhard Klemmer is exploiting.
And he is a designer and sculptor based in northern Germany, right?
Yes, up in Buxtehude. And welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. We are looking at this fascinating stack of sources today.
Some really incredible stuff.
Yeah, we have his extensive visual portfolio spanning from 2024 to 2026, alongside his own artist manifesto from 2026.
Where he outlines this pursuit of what he calls the Gesamtkunstwerk.
The total work of art. And what is so compelling here is that he doesn't just stop at bridging the ceramic and the botanical.
No, he takes it much further.
He does. He is now using that physical synthesis to launch this ancient art form straight into a completely unexpected digital frontier.
And to really trace how he arrives at that digital frontier, I think we have to look at how he engineers the physical foundation first.
The clay and the fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because until 2024, Klemmer actually wasn't making his own vessels.
Really?
Yeah, but he realized that relying on pre-made containers meant relinquishing control over, well, essentially half of the Gesamtkunstwerk.
Oh, that makes sense. You can't have a total work of art if you didn't make half of it.
Right. He needed the vessel to be in direct, intentional dialogue with the specific root structure and the canopy of the plant it was holding.
So he takes control of the whole process.
He does. He began crafting his own free-form stoneware, utilizing a very deliberate thermal climb.
What does that look like in practice?
So he does a bisque firing at 900 degrees Celsius to essentially lock the shape and drive out the chemical water.
Okay, 900 degrees.
And then that is followed by a glaze firing at 1200 degrees.
Wow, that is hot.
It is. That 1200 degree mark is where the silica in the glaze actually melts into glass, permanently fusing with the clay body.
So that is the controlled, predictable side of his studio.
Very controlled.
But then he brings in the raku technique. And the portfolio shows this dramatic shift in his glazes when he does this.
Oh, absolutely.
Reading his notes on the raku process, it feels like looking at a deliberate attempt to invite chaos into that previously controlled environment.
Chaos is the right word for it.
He does the initial bisque at 900 degrees, like you said, then applies the specialized raku glaze and fires it to about 1,000 degrees.
Right.
But the critical departure happens when the piece is at its peak temperature. The pot is literally glowing inside the kiln.
Just radiating orange heat.
Yeah. And he pulls it out of that 1,000-degree environment straight into the ambient air of the studio.
The thermal shock there is immense. The clay body and the molten glass glaze shrink at entirely different rates when they hit that cooler air.
They just can't handle the tension.
Exactly. The glaze can't handle it, so it instantly fractures, creating this microscopic network of crazing across the entire surface.
And then it gets even crazier.
It does. He takes that glowing, freshly cracked piece and buries it in a reduction chamber filled with combustible material.
Like sawdust, paper, dried leaves.
Right, whatever will burn.
And the heat of the pot instantly ignites the material. The analogy I thought of when I was reading this is like taking a hard-boiled egg straight out of boiling water and plunging it into an ice bath.
Oh, that is a great visual.
Yeah, the shell just shatters from the rapid temperature change. And if you were to, say, soak that cracked egg in dark soy sauce, the liquid would seep through the fractures,
Leaving those dark lines.
staining a web of dark lines onto the egg white. Exactly. Klemmer is doing that, but instead of boiling water and soy sauce, he's using a 1,000-degree inferno and the resulting carbon smoke.
Right, because the fire consumes the oxygen in the closed chamber, creating what is called a reducing atmosphere.
And what does that actually do to the pot?
Well, the chemistry of that reducing atmosphere is crucial. Because the fire is starving for oxygen, it actively pulls oxygen atoms out of the metal oxides in the glaze itself.
Wow, so it changes the fundamental chemistry.
Completely. A copper oxide that might normally look green in an electric kiln will suddenly flash into brilliant metallic copper pennies in a Rococo reduction.
That is wild.
And simultaneously, that thick, heavy carbon smoke is forced deep into those thermal fractures you mentioned.
The eggshell crack.
Exactly, permanently staining the raw clay underneath black. And Klemmer really relies on this violent, unrepeatable chemistry to ensure the manufacturing process remains alive, quote unquote.
Because you can't duplicate it.
No, you cannot perfectly replicate the atmospheric pressure, the ambient temperature, or the exact path the smoke takes. Every piece is entirely unique.
So he masters that. But then he pushes that pursuit of material mastery even further in 2025 by introducing porcelain.
Which is a whole different beast.
Right. It requires a completely different kind of discipline compared to the organized chaos of raku. He notes firing his porcelain at 1295 degrees Celsius.
With some gas-fired pieces at 1250 degrees, yeah.
Right. And porcelain is just, from what I understand, notoriously antagonistic to the artist.
Oh, it fights you every step of the way.
Yeah.
The primary ingredient is kaolin clay, which is composed of microscopic hexagonal plates that slide past one another very easily.
So it's slippery.
Very. This means when you are throwing or hand building it, it absorbs water and loses its structural integrity very quickly.
Oh, wow.
And in the kiln, approaching 1300 degrees, the porcelain actually approaches its melting point. It becomes pyroplastic.
So it's basically liquid again.
Almost. If the walls are too thin, or if the piece isn't perfectly balanced, it will literally sag or collapse under its own weight in the fire.
And it has a physical memory too, right?
Yes, clay memory is a real problem.
If you accidentally bend a piece of porcelain while it's wet and then, just bend it back into shape, it looks fine on the shelf.
But the clay remembers.
Yeah, when it hits that 1295 degree peak, the clay remembers that initial stress and will warp right back to where it was originally bent.
It is so unforgiving, but mastering the volatility of raku and the strict structural demands of porcelain gives Klemmer this incredibly comprehensive toolkit.
Because he understands how to manipulate the earth and the fire to achieve highly specific surface tensions.
Exactly. And he weaponizes that heat to capture the very specific, wet architectural reality of his own backyard.
This is where we get to the brick pots.
Yes. So Klemmer lives in Buxtehude in northern Germany, as we mentioned.
And the architectural vernacular of that region is defined by red brick and clinker facades.
Right. And he uses his understanding of firing temperatures to translate that regional architecture into his Kusamono practice.
The sources have this fascinating technical breakdown of why those clinker facades exist in the first place, actually.
It's a structural necessity for the climate.
Yeah, standard building bricks are fired between 800 and 1100 degrees Celsius, so they remain relatively porous.
But clinkers are taken up to 1200 degrees.
Right. And at that threshold, the pores in the clay completely close up.
A process called vitrification.
Vitrification, yeah. They become incredibly dense and entirely water resistant, which, if you are building houses in the harsh, wet climate of northern Germany, you absolutely need.
And he takes that hyper-local, weather-beaten architectural aesthetic and builds these brick pots as a direct homage.
Looking at pot 327 from late 2025, the surface perfectly mimics deeply weathered ancient clinker.
The fissures are so deep.
They are structural, dry. It looks like a fragment of a ruined northern German wall. But sitting right inside this rugged, rigid European architectural base is a massive, vibrant green monstera plant.
The cross-cultural synthesis there is highly intentional.
Blending the two worlds.
Yes. He is taking Kusamono, which is a practice deeply rooted in Japanese observational nature, and plotting it literally in the architectural history of Buxtehude.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this setup, though.
Go for it.
If we look at the fundamental philosophy of Kusamono, the goal is natural harmony.
Traditional harmony, yes.
Right. The pot and the plant should look like they belong together, reflecting a cohesive micro-landscape, like a quiet mountain scene or a wetland floor.
A slice of nature.
Exactly. But here you have a wet, tropical, vining monstera shoved into a dry, rigid architectural brick. I mean, it looks like an alien invasion.
It is definitely jarring.
Doesn't that stark visual dissonance shatter the whole idea of a Gesamtkunstwerk? If the elements are fighting each other, it isn't a unified work of art.
Well, it only shatters the Gesamtkunstwerk if you assume that a total work of art must be inherently peaceful.
Oh, interesting point.
And Klemmer specifically addresses this in his notes. He acknowledges that while harmony is the traditional baseline, he often pursues what he calls an experimental contrast in form and color.
So the tension is the point.
The tension is entirely the point.
But tension for the sake of tension can just be bad design, right? Why is this specific pairing work?
Because the contrast forces the eye to reevaluate both materials. The harsh, dry, porous look of the northern German brick makes the lush, glossy, vibrant surface of the Monstera leaf visually register much more intensely.
Oh, I see. Much more than it would in a subtle, harmonious green pot.
Exactly. The rigid geometric lines of the brick accentuate the organic, sprawling negative space of the Monstera's fenestration.
The holes in its leaves.
Right. He is using the architectural severity of his homeland as an anchor to let the chaotic tropical growth just pop.
And that reliance on aggressive contrast really carries over into his glaze development for his 2026 stoneware collection, too.
It does. He has a piece coated in a mist forest green glaze that utilizes heavy pooling to mimic the damp, uneven floor of a woodland.
It's beautiful. And then you turn the page of the portfolio, and there is a raku pot in Shadow Lake Blue.
Oh, that one is striking.
It's a violently swirling, highly reduced copper blue that literally looks like churning water.
But we see the zenith of this experimental contrast in his integration of kintsugi. He has a piece of older Chinese blue stoneware from his 2025 collection. The pot had been completely shattered.
And he reassembled it using the kintsugi method.
Right, mapping the fault lines with thick, jagged veins of pure gold lacquer.
The visual impact of those gold fault lines is incredibly aggressive against the deep blue stoneware.
It really stands out.
And then, growing out of this fractured, heavily scarred artifact is a flawless, symmetrical, blindingly bright yellow Phalaenopsis orchid.
The gold lacquer of the kintsugi visually anchors the yellow of the orchid. He is linking the botanical element directly to the trauma of the ceramic.
That is brilliant. The plant isn't just sitting in the pot.
No, its color palette is a direct continuation of the pot's repair mechanism.
But then, he pivots away from that heavy, aggressive aesthetic entirely in another piece from January 2026.
The primula arrangement.
Yeah.
Huh.
He pairs a white primula, which is a flower so delicate it looks almost translucent, with a paper porcelain pot.
Paper porcelain is such a bizarre material to use for a functional vessel holding wet soil.
How does that even work?
It requires an intricate understanding of organic burnout in the kiln. You are blending liquid porcelain slip with heavily processed paper pulp.
Okay.
The cellulose fibers of the paper create a microscopic scaffold within the clay body, which allows the artist to build walls much thinner and more delicate than pure porcelain would ever allow.
Because the clay particles cling to the paper fibers while it's wet.
Exactly.
But when it hits the kiln, all that paper just burns away entirely.
Leaving behind a micro-honeycomb structure, the resulting ceramic is remarkably lightweight, almost fragile to the touch.
But it holds together.
Right, it's structurally sound because the porcelain has vitrified around the empty spaces where the paper used to be.
And then he used an engobe comb technique on the surface, scratching through layers of colored liquid clay to create these really subtle pastel washes of blue and brown.
The visual weight of the paper porcelain matches the visual weight of the translucent primula perfectly.
It shows such a vast range. I mean, he moves from the brutality of the brick pot to the extreme fragility of the paper porcelain.
He really commands the materials.
But I have to say, the piece that shows he doesn't take himself too seriously, the one that breaks that austere, brooding artist stereotype, is a deep purple Usambara violet housed in a green and white oxidized crackle pot.
Ah, the January 2026 piece with the miniature sculpted figures.
Yes, he places a tiny, hand-sculpted garden dwarf and a little brown owl right at the base of the pot looking up at the violet.
It's so unexpected.
When you consider the deep, complex chemistry of his glazes and his strict adherence to creating a Gesamtkunstwerk, dropping a garden gnome into the composition is just a brilliant disruption.
And because he hand makes every piece in his studio, entirely avoiding mass-produced elements, he has the latitude to scale the narrative of the work.
What do you mean by scale the narrative?
Well, Kusamono traditionally scales nature down, making a massive mountain meadow fit on a tiny table. By introducing the dwarf and the owl, Klemmer forces the viewer to scale themselves down.
Oh, I see.
You are no longer a giant looking down at a pod. You are suddenly occupying the same narrative space as the figures, looking up at the canopy of the Usambara violet.
The pot becomes a self-contained, whimsical diorama.
It really does.
So by the spring of 2026, he has fully demonstrated this physical mastery. He controls the thermal shock of raku, the rigid chemistry of porcelain, the structural vitrification of his northern German clinkers, and the botanical tension of his plantings.
He has conquered the physical realm.
Yes. And then, in May 2026, he introduces an entirely new, non-physical tool to his Gesamtkunstwerk.
The AI.
Exactly. He brings his tactile ceramics into direct contact with artificial intelligence.
He begins utilizing ChatGPT's visual generation models to reinterpret his physical Kusamono arrangements.
But it isn't just taking photographs for a catalog, right?
No, not at all. He is feeding the structural, botanical, and thematic data of his physical pieces into the AI to generate highly stylized digital translations.
And the outputs in the portfolio are just staggering. He takes an arrangement featuring armeria, those sea pinks with spherical flowers, potted in what he calls an Arctic copper mist raku pot.
Beautiful piece.
And the AI generates an image that looks exactly like a 19th century botanical sketch.
It's uncanny.
The background is rendered as heavily textured aged paper. The line work analyzing the structure of the raku cracks and the botanical anatomy of the armeria is rendered with the precision of a historical etching.
And then he takes another arrangement, a Christ's thorn, Euphorbia millii, planted in a light blue, three-legged crackle pot, and directs the AI to render it as a fluid watercolor.
Oh, wow. The watercolor one.
Yeah. The model interprets the crazing of the ceramic glaze as bleeding ink washes, and the sharp pinks of the flowers just diffuse across the digital canvas as if the paper were actually wet.
But the most conceptually dense translations are based on pot number 88.
The dark raku pot.
Yeah, a rectangular, dark raku pot holding wild strawberries, Fragaria vesca. The first AI iteration is a mixed media piece showing the strawberry arrangement sitting on a battered wooden desk, surrounded by physical paintbrushes and a watercolor palette.
The AI is digitally generating the illusion of analog creation.
Which is meta in itself, but the second iteration of Potno 88 is what completely changes the context of his work.
The architectural diorama.
Yes. The AI generates the strawberries and the dark raku pot on what appears to be old parchment, overlaid with faded cursive script.
Like an old Da Vinci notebook.
Yeah. But positioned directly beside the Kusamono is a highly detailed classical architectural sketch of a domed cathedral labeled Piazza del Duomo.
Because the AI is making a visual and conceptual leap. It's linking the structural geometry of Klemmer's hand-built ceramic pot to the historical grandeur of European Renaissance architecture.
That is wild.
It places the humble strawberry plant on the exact same conceptual plane as the Duomo.
Okay, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Klemmer is a sculptor who relies on the volatile chemistry of a 1295-degree kiln. He physically pulls glowing, melting earth out of fires to force carbon smoke into fractures.
Very hands-on.
That tactile, dangerous reality is the core of his work. Turning to a clean, frictionless, generative AI model to recreate his own pieces, I mean, it feels like a rejection of that physical labor.
You think it's a cop-out?
Yeah. Why spend weeks fighting the memory of porcelain just to type a prompt into a computer? It feels like a massive cop-out for a tactile artist.
Well, it would be a cop-out if the AI images were intended to replace the physical pots.
Okay.
If he stopped firing clay and only generated digital images, yes, he would be abandoning his medium. But that isn't what is happening here.
How so?
The physical fired Kusamono arrangement acts as the foundational prompt for the digital expansion. He is using the AI to extrapolate the themes he already built into the clay.
So the physical plant and the pot are essentially the raw data.
Exactly. When he pairs the structural density of a brick pot with the chaotic growth of a monstera, he is exploring contrast in 3 dimensions.
Right.
When he feeds that piece into an AI and asks it to render it as a Renaissance architectural sketch, he is exploring that same contrast in the dimension of historical context.
Oh, I see.
The AI is a new glaze. It's a new atmosphere. A designer is never bound to a single material. They utilize whatever tool best articulates the tension they're trying to explore.
So he is basically creating a continuous feedback loop between the ancient, dirty, analog world of ceramics and the pristine, intangible world of generative code.
The Gesamtkunstwerk work expands beyond the edge of the physical pot. The total work of art now includes the clay, the roots, the carbon smoke, and the algorithmic interpretation of all those elements combined.
Which really leaves you as the listener staring down a fascinating philosophical cliff here.
It absolutely does.
If a physical piece of earth, pulled from a violent fire and planted with a living organism, serves as the raw code to prompt an artificial intelligence, is the resulting digital watercolor merely a passive reflection of the original sculpture?
Or has he done something else entirely?
Exactly. Or has the artist successfully expanded the boundary of the physical object, making the digital rendering an equal load-bearing pillar of the Gesamtkunstwerk? It really leaves you wondering, when an artist achieves equal mastery over the reduction kiln and the generative algorithm, where does the actual art reside now?
Is it in the clay, the plant, or the code?
In the vitrified clay, in the vascular tissue of the plant, or in the synthetic architecture of the code, it's something you really have to ponder.